Hi, good morning, everyone. So welcome to our talk for our first breakout session of the day. Here we're featuring the work of Dr. George Stanley. He is a renowned educator and an esteemed member of the upstate community, board certified OBGYN, I believe recently recertified up through this year. And he has taught us many lectures, some of the most captivating in my experience here at Upstate. And he's also been recognized for his achievements in academia by the Phi Alpha Phi Medical Honor Society, as well as for pharmaceutical teaching, faculty teaching, as well as his role as a professor in gynecology and obstetrics. So it's my honor and privilege to introduce you all to Dr. George Stanley.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the kind introduction, Alan. I really appreciate it. First of all, I want to thank everybody who invited me to participate in this. I also want to thank my fellow participants and students who have encouraged me. I also want to send especially thank you to Nadia and Samantha who encouraged me to do this. So my hope is that in the next little bit, you'll get something out of this presentation. I thank you all for this. Right now, again, we're Zooming and everything is fine, but probably while I'm doing this, you'll hear the background of our two dogs coming in from a walk. My wife is doing them right now. So, but again, no kids, because all of our kids are back at their respective colleges. All right, so I'm going to try to do something. So I may have some issues. Let me see if I can do this. So if I hit share screen, there we go. All right. Okay. And perfect. Can you guys see this and can you guys hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up if that's okay. Can you see my screen? You can see everything. All right, wonderful, because I can see a little cluster of folks, okay? So again, as part of the Health Justice Conference, we are doing this on the commemorated celebrated birthday and holiday, federal holiday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As you can see by the two images that we have here, we have two very famous heroes. On the image of Dr. King on the left, absolutely, who is a fantastic, great man. I'm going to say some words about him that some of you may not know. The image on the right is a fictional superhero. That's a superhero. Her name is Angela Abar. She's known as Sister Night. She's a Black female superhero in the Watchmen universe, which is an amazing series that was on HBO. I would recommend anybody who's a fourth-year medical student, not as a third year because there's not enough time. I would definitely recommend that you watch The Watchmen as a fourth-year medical student if you want to get an interesting perspective on different racial ideas as they go into a comic book universe. So again, for many of you who have grown up and heard about different things about Dr. King, my relationship has been a little bit different. I remember my father and my mother, who grew up during the time when he was really prevalent. My father actually had the ability at that time to bring students to listen to some of his speeches back in the day. He always told me he never had a chance to shake the man's hand, but he was no more than about 5 feet away from him. So I thought that was always a cool thing. But there's some things I wanted to discuss about Dr. King that you may not know about. So I modified this presentation for that. So first thing, let's see, hold on, so we can advance this. There we go. So I'm getting the hang of things. Okay. So Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born January 15th, 1929, and was assassinated April 4th, 1968. He was born in Atlanta, Georgia. He was a graduate of Morehouse College. Morehouse College is an all-Black male institution in Atlanta. And actually, 4 of my closest friends who I went to medical school with were from Morehouse. Okay? He participated in and led marches for Blacks' rights to vote, for desegregation and other basic civil rights. Like so many other civil rights activists and leaders during the 1950s, King was persecuted by the federal government and despised, hated almost pathologically by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who considered King a radical and made him the object of the FBI's count and tell program from 1963 forward. Basically, during this time, he was under surveillance, video surveillance at that time, photographs, tape recordings, and those sort of things done to discredit him and discredit him in the public eye for what he was doing. And many historical and contemporary civil rights activists were considered public enemies in the United States. Not just Dr. King, Rosa Parks, Angela Davis, Stokely Carmichael, many, many others who today, who we absolutely praise, at the time were vilified and labeled as public enemies to the United States. Okay. Oops. Trying to figure out which button to push. During the 1963 March on Washington, Dr. King delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. This was obviously an iconic speech. And remember, Dr. King was one of countless individuals and groups who strove for civil rights. The "I Have a Dream" speech is just one of his speeches. And I would encourage all to read many of his other speeches where he condemns, opposes poverty, capitalism, wage gaps in the Vietnam War. Although initially strongly opposed by him, President Ronald Reagan signed the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday bill into law in 1983, and the holiday was finally observed in January 20th of 1986. Three states were the last to adopt this holiday. Arizona in 1992, New Hampshire in 1999, and South Carolina in 2000. They were the last three states to adopt this federal holiday only after considerable economic and political pressures were applied. For Arizona, it was basically a threat that the Super Bowl would not be held in Arizona if they did not change their ways. If you want to have some more background for this, I would strongly urge you to find on any music service Public Enemies by the time I get to Arizona. Listen to that. That gives a little bit of background about this whole thing. Finally, in January 2000, the first nationwide celebration of this day was with his name. Okay. Now, the main thing that we're going to be discussing today is the concepts of race, racism, and racial issues in women's health, a historical and contemporary discussion. I gave this presentation approximately a year ago as a grand rounds presentation for our department, and it has since been, in a sense, archived in the Blackboard of Upstate. So some of you may have seen this presentation before. So if you have, this will be a reminder. There have been some additions and omissions for this. So I hope that you'll get something out of it, okay, as we go through this. All right. And again, dogs are coming back in, so you may see me sort of look over to the side. All right. So my lecture objectives for this presentation, my hope is that for you, the participants, at the conclusion of this, you will understand how to gain an appreciation for how race, racism, and racial issues were involved and or incorporated in playing roles in several of countless examples of women's health in American history. Discuss how race, racism, and racial issues are being examined in contemporary aspects of women's health, particularly in the evaluation of severe maternal morbidity in African American and Black women. Review some of the current methods OBGYN educators and national policy and lawmakers have used to address or improve race, racism, and racial issues in contemporary women's health. And lastly, review updates regarding recent legislation that aim to address issues of maternal morbidity and mortality in African American or Black women. Okay. I have no financial conflicts whatsoever. Another series I would highly recommend to anybody who is interested in seeing how these things were depicted would be this series on HBO called Lovecraft Country, okay? It's a series whereby the gentleman in the middle is a African-American serviceman who's returning back from the Korean War and some of the things that were going on with him. So it's an absolutely fantastic view of many of the racial issues that were going on at the time. It dealt with things such as the death of Emmett Till and other racial issues with a very supernatural involvement as well. I would highly recommend anybody to watch this series. Going through some historical notes. African people were forcibly brought to the United States as enslaved persons, arriving first in Virginia in 1619. We have done traces of my family lineage, and we have found that our lineage goes back to at least 1700s in Virginia as well. People of African descent have histories of commission and omission. Omission means that sometimes certain events have been removed from the narrative, such as the Tulsa massacre of 1912, where where many, many Black people were absolutely brutally murdered during the time. That has been omitted from history books. And also crimes of commission, wherein events that were done by Black people were attributed to others. One of the best examples of that is the ancient Egyptians. We talk about and read about the ancient Egyptians, those who built the pyramids, those who built the Sphinx, those who were masters of medicine, architecture, and agricultural and health and astronomy. Those were Black people. Those were dark-skinned, curly-haired, broad-nosed, Negroid Black people, not a mythical reddish-brown people. They were Black people. And those were the people who influenced the Greeks and the Romans. In America, enslaved Africans were forced to work, beaten, tortured for recreation, treated as property, bought, sold, forced to breastfeed the master's children at the expense of our own, murdered with few legal repercussions, victim of unspeakable, unethical medical practices. America is built from the blood, sweat, and tears of enslaved Africans and their descendants. When we reflect back about a year ago to the insurrection and basically terrorist act that occurred on the Capitol building, Black people built the Capitol. Black people built the White House. Descendants of enslaved Africans have been subjected to segregation, Jim Crow laws, MAGA, and other supremacy rhetoric, and institutionalized racism. The things that we are talking about are things that my family and my parents went through. African Americans and other peoples of color have been disproportionately adversely affected during the COVID-19 pandemic as well. So we need to look at some things with some historical context as well. We have to have some definitions before we do that. So just some basic definitions. Race. Race refers to a large body of people characterized by a similarity of descent. It's also a biological definition, a group of or population that shares common genetic characteristics and physical features. That can be paired and contrasted with ethnicity, whereas race, a socially constructed category based on observed phenotypic manifestations of presumed underlying genetic differences, versus ethnicity, which is a group of persons according to a shared geographical, national, and cultural heritage, and encompasses both biologic and non-biological differences. Okay? Racism is different. Racism is a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. For this definition, this was done by a young African American woman named Kennedy Mitchum, and for that we are thankful for this most current Webster's Dictionary of Racism. There are also different levels of racism as well. There's personally mediated racism, there's institutionalized racism, internalized racism, and cultural racism. And the new racism is to deny that racism even exists. A number of years ago, one of our former residents got me interested in the aspects of the social determinants of health. And my very first Grand Rounds presentation that I gave was on poverty and homelessness and women's health. And I've given that to various members of varying medical school classes. So if you look at the different aspects of the social determinants of health, you're looking at food, economic stability, education, healthcare, you look at also the ideas of community and social context, you have racism and discrimination. So if racism and discrimination are part of the community and social context, racism is a public health issue. And understanding and acknowledging racism's pervasive impact is the first step to addressing it. One of the things I think we need to do is to look at things in a historical context as well, okay? So as I mentioned, enslaved individuals were brought in from Africa and arrived to the United States as early as 1619, okay? And you look at these varying passages that are seen in this particular chart that's representative. I don't have my pointer represented, but if you look, the very, very strong, more olive-like color, which shows the pathway in which enslaved Africans were brought to the United States. This is an area which has been called the Middle Passage, okay, where hundreds of millions of persons of African descent were lost during this particular time. Okay? However, there was a slight paradigm shift that occurred in 1807. On March 1807, Thomas Jefferson signed the Act Prohibiting Importation of Slaves of 1807, ending the Transatlantic slave trade. So looking at that, President Thomas Jefferson wrote this legislation that was initially drafted then and finally implemented in January 1st, 1808. Basically, to read it, it says, "Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled, that from and after this first day of January 1808, it shall not be lawful to import or bring into the United States or its territories, therefore, from any foreign kingdom, place, or country, any Negro, mulatto, or person of color with intent to hold, sell, or dispose of such a Negro, mulatto, or person of color as a slave or to be held to service of slavery or service of labor." So the importation of slavery was outlawed. Slavery itself was still very rampant and still going on. But however, because of now this change in supply and demand economics and supply and demand issues, different modifications needed to be done. And we're going to look into that now. Reproductive medicine was essential to the maintenance and success of Southern slavery, especially during the antebellum era, when the largest migration and sale of Black women occurred in the nation's young history. Doctors formed an elite cohort of elite white men whose work, especially their gynecological examinations of women, affected the country's slave markets. Fecundity, that is the ability of somebody to get pregnant, infertility, or venereal diseases, all would play some sort of factor in these considerations. Southern doctors knew enslaved women's reproductive labor, including treatment of GYN illnesses to prevent pregnancy, helped them to revolutionize professional women's medicine. And most pioneering surgeries, such as ovarian removal and cesarean sections that occurred in American gynecological history, happened during these interactions between white Southern doctors and their Black enslaved patients. So what we have learned today about many of the gynecological surgeries and procedures and such came directly out of this interaction of white Southern male physicians and enslaved Black females. The first women's hospital in the United States was housed in a small slave farm in Mount Meigs, Alabama, a town approximately 15 miles from Montgomery, a large slave trading center. From 1844 to 1849, Anarcha, Betsy, Lucy, and about 9 other unidentified enslaved women and girls lived and worked together in the slave hospital that Dr. James Marion Sims founded for his training and surgical repair in his patients. Sims had his workers, probably the enslaved, build hospitals for the treatment of enslaved women affected by vesico-vaginal fistulas. That's a condition whereby you have an abnormal connection between the vagina and the bladder due to repeated childbirth, trauma, and inability to heal, those sort of things. Sims would later be known as the father of American gynecology. Let's look at Sims a little bit more closely. So James Marion Sims subjected his property and the property of others to horrific conditions for which they could say no. And those conditions that were the direct result of being enslaved. Conditions such as poor nutrition, constant pregnancy, working constantly, all those things contributed to the vesico-vaginal fistulas that he was looking at. We're going to be focusing more on the Dr. Sims' treatment of enslaved females, but his treatment of infants was even more horrific. What Dr. Sims would do for infant Black babies would drill holes in their head with different metalworks to see what the effect of tetanus was, almost resulting in 100% mortality on infants. With respect to his the enslaved women, again, these women could not say no. These were property of him or other people. And he was actually criticized by his peers at that time, not just contemporarily now, but by his peers. He was criticized by using subjects who could not oppose to what he wanted. Dr. Sims did not use anesthesia, for several reasons. One, it wasn't widely available, but mostly due to the commonly shared belief at the time that Blacks didn't feel pain in the same way as whites. Although he did cure the vesicovaginal fistula of one woman, Anarcha, after 30 operations, he used that success as his golden ticket to secure his legacy for future endeavors. So he used that success to go to New York City and to continue the same practices on poor immigrant women that he was doing in the same way that he did in the South. Okay. As I'm sure you can imagine, during this time, there were no residency programs or things like that. So physician training was more of like a journeyman's thing, okay? So his trainees who would go through and see these horrific conditions, but then move on, after a while, there were no more trainees to come through. So for that, who did he use? He used the same enslaved women. They became his surgical assistants. Now, if you see that, that's a contradiction within your own narrative. If you, as a white male Southerner, think that it has been bestowed upon you by God Almighty to take care of these heathen, ignoramus Black people because they know no better, but then you use those exact same enslaved people for your medical procedures that are technically difficult, that is a contradiction in your own narrative. This is a painting that was commissioned in 1882 that was displayed in the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Now, when you look at this at face value, you look and you see, although the enslaved woman is in a very subservient position, she is clothed, and the assistants are maintaining a respectable distance and giving her modesty. There's a sheet that separates, that sort of thing. This is a farcical representation. This was the farthest from the truth that was going on at this time. These women were brutalized. There was no consideration whatsoever of their privacy, of their dignity, of anything like that. And as the different wave of this idea came through, and people realized that this was such a fictitious glorification of this particular individual. This painting was removed in the late 2005s and early 2006s due to the complaints of the people that offended. And this image is not the only one. If you look at this particular image, this image shows some of the giants, the historical giants of OBGYN. We can see Sims in the front with his silver spoon in the front, and there are other people in the back. I don't want to necessarily pick out anybody, but I think in there are a gentleman named Kelly who was responsible for bladder surgeries and those sort of things. I remember the very, very first time I presented this presentation to my family, my wife and my younger daughter specifically brought this out to me. If you look at this picture, look how the light captures the faces of the men. They almost look angelic, like the light is shining upon them. They have an angelic presentation to them as to what they're doing. However, the poor Black woman is barely even discernible from the bedding or the background. And if you look in the back, right behind the gentleman in the lab coat on the left, there's a skull there. You wonder where that came from. So that's a very interesting depiction of this. Looking more into Dr. Sims. A Sims statue was erected in 1849. And it was taken down in the 1920s due to a subway construction, and then later moved to Central Park in 1934, opposite the New York Academy of Science. The East Harlem Preservation Society began to call for the relocation of the statue in 2007 because community activists didn't feel that it reflected the culture, attitudes of the predominantly Black and Latino community of East Harlem. How can you possibly have a statue erected in a place that is a dominant hub and cultural center of people of color for a person who made his career destroying that? It would be the same idea as if you were to put a statue of Adolf Hitler in the middle of some major town in Israel. The same idea. In February 2011, a letter to move the statue was sent to the head of Parks Department, but it was refused because the idea being that we do not remove art for its content. Just because the culture has changed at the time, we're not moving the art for art's sake, even though the statue had been moved from a previous location to the current location. In June of 2016, a call again to relocate the statue was done with the hashtag #NotOurHero. Finally, in 2011, amongst protests, defacing of the statue where somebody wrote racist along it, and the change in political ideals and leadership, you had the resurgence and you had the uprising of the Black Lives Matter movement and other things, and also change in leadership at the Parks Department. The statue was finally relocated to the burial site in New York City. The Sims statue was finally removed August 17th, 2018. And you look at the protests, and actually, it was this image of these 4 young women drenching themselves in red paint to signify the blood and the brutality that this person done. This was the image that launched my presentation today when I initially gave it. We're going to skip the next few slides, okay? Sorry about that. No. This particular device has been known as the Sims speculum, and a Black female OBGYN physician named Camilla Phillips now refers to this solution. I do not use the term Sim speculum anymore, even in my professional life. I do not use that term anymore. Okay. The next few slides we're going to skip. We're going to now change into some definitions and looking at maternal morbidity and mortality. So just some definitions. So maternal death is the death of a woman while pregnant or within 42 days of a termination of a pregnancy, irrespective of the duration and site of pregnancy, from any cause related to or aggravated by the pregnancy or its management, but not from an accidental or incidental cause, okay? And the maternal mortality rate is looked at as maternal deaths per 1,000 live births. Then other definitions of morbidity, mortality, mortality is deaths within a population, morbidity is illnesses within a population. When we look at the maternal mortality ratio per 100,000 live births for this time span from 2005 to 2014, the incidence of maternal mortality for non-Hispanic Black women is the highest in the country over all ethnicities and all races. If you look at causes of death by race or ethnicity with respect to maternal deaths, all the parameters that are seen, Black women have the highest deaths from cardiac events, hypertension, eclampsia, drugs, sepsis, hemorrhage, homicide. Black women are the highest. Pregnancy-related deaths by ethnicity, again, per 100,000. Black women have the highest death rates of any other ethnicity. Maternal death rates by race from 2008, Black women have the overall highest mortality, higher than the US overall, higher than white women, higher than Hispanic women. Right? The maternal mortality statistics, again, of race and ethnic gaps. If you look, deaths per 100,000 live births, 37.1 non-Hispanic Black women, okay, versus 14.7 for non-Hispanic white and 11.8 Hispanic women, highest. Even more scary are college-educated Black women had higher severe maternal morbidity rates that were higher than all other women with less than a high school education. The severe maternal morbidity, again, for non-Hispanic Black women, 231 per 100,000 versus 139 per 100,000 for non-Hispanic white women. A Black woman is 22% more likely to die from heart disease than a white woman, 71% more likely to perish from cervical cancer, and 243% more likely to die from pregnancy or childbirth-related causes. One of the most tragic events of this was this young woman here. This is Dr. Shanice Wallace, who is a pediatrician, chief resident in pediatrics in Illinois University of Medicine. She was alive from 1999 to October 24th, 2000. She basically died from a ruptured liver as a complication of preeclampsia with severe features in 2010. And when you look and you read about her husband, who stated that this woman was in pain and she was just not listened to, this is inexcusable. A publication that came out less than a year ago looked at this even more. So this is the statewide severe maternal morbidity review in Illinois. So the rate of severe maternal morbidity has increased from 41 per 10,000 deliveries in 1998 to 1999 to 163 per 10,000 deliveries in 2010 to 2011. There are significant racial and ethnic disparities in severe maternal morbidity, with rates 1.2 to 2.1 times higher among non-Hispanic, Black, Native American, Hispanic, and Asian and Pacific Islander women compared with non-Hispanic white women. Basically, to look at this particular study, the inclusion criteria for this study are both recommended by the CDC, the American College of OBGYN. Basically, for this study, what they wanted to do, they wanted to look at women who were pregnant or within 42 days of delivery who were admitted to an ICU or some sort of critical care unit, transfuse 4 units or more of packed red blood cells, or both, for a whole year, January 1st, 2018 to December 31st, 2018. And also these were women who underwent this specific facility level review, okay? For that year time in Illinois, for the total, there were a total number of just under 142,000 total live births in the state of Illinois. And there were 408 cases of severe maternal morbidity. And compared with all live births, women with severe maternal morbidity were more likely to be non-Hispanic, Black, age 35, multiparous, and have public insurance and received inadequate care. Whoops, sorry about that. Go back to, and received inadequate prenatal care and were overweight according to BMI. And the majority of the reviewed cases of severe maternal morbidity were cases where they had an ICU admission that were 59%, transfusion alone, or both. The top three causes for severe maternal morbidity were hemorrhage, preeclampsia, and infectious sepsis. 22% of the cases, or 22% or 89 cases of the severe maternal morbidity cases were determined to be potentially preventable, and 20% or 82 cases were deemed not preventable, but improvement of care was needed. And healthcare professional opportunities to alter severe maternal morbidity outcomes were more frequently identified by peer review during the interpartum, that is during labor, and the postpartum cases. And the most cases involved in the delay of treatment, 81% in the delay of diagnosis at different level hospitals, okay? So what are some recommendations that OBGYNs or other health providers can do? We need to cultivate within our organization diversity and inclusion among our learners, faculty, staff, and most importantly, the leadership within our organization. Dr. Chin in his opening remarks definitely reflected that. We need to communicate. We need to have those difficult and sometimes uncomfortable, real, open conversations about race and racial equality at our institution and their effects locally and within policies and practices of our organization. We need to understand and teach the importance of the social determinants of health and structural racism in health services as a part of the curriculum for trainees. We need to advocate for more diversity of staff, employee management, facility, faculty, and leadership. One of the things that we do like to highlight at our institution is Dr. Sarah Logan Frazier. Okay, she was the first woman to earn a medical degree from Syracuse University and the fourth African-American woman to be a licensed physician in the United States. Let's look at her life just a little bit closer if we could. So Sarah Logan Frazier was born in Syracuse, New York in 1850 during the year that the Federal Fugitive Slave Act was enacted. The Federal Fugitive Slave Act said that if any slave was left their plantation, they could be brought back by federal agents. That would be sheriffs, that would be federal agents who could bring them back to where they had escaped. Okay? She was the daughter of a fugitive slave, and the family were vocal abolitionists. She was the first African-American woman to be graduated from Syracuse University Medical School. I want everybody just to take a moment and think about that. Imagine being the only Black woman in medical school. Imagine the death threats. Imagine the hostility, not microaggressions, macroaggressions that she went through. Think about that for a minute. She married Charles Frazier in 1882 and moved to the Dominican Republic and was the first African-American woman physician in the Dominican Republic. Following the birth of her daughter and the death of her husband, she moved back to Syracuse, where she lived on Westcott Street, the neighborhood where we live. She moved back to Washington, D.C., and died in 1933. And she's memorialized by the Logan Park, the Sarah Logan Center, and multiple images and paintings throughout Syracuse and the upstate campus. Looking at that, again, reflecting on the comments of Dr. Chin, how about racial diversity in medicine? Where are we? If you look in the years from 2012 to 2015, the number of racial and ethnic minorities among medical school applicants, students, and graduates and faculty have remained essentially stable. So if you look at acceptance rates, the vast majority of people who are accepted are whites, followed by Asian, Hispanic, Latino, followed by Blacks. If you look at medical school graduation rates, this is 2015 data. The highest number of people who graduate medical school are whites, followed by Asians, followed by Blacks, and Latino Hispanics. Again, this data can be a little bit difficult to collect because race, ethnicity do not always conform to simple labels, and also there's a self-identification as multiracial as well, okay? The physician workforce in the United States is just, just under 9% identify as Black, Native American, Alaskan Native, Hispanic, or Latino. And Blacks make up about, whereas Blacks make up about 13% of the national population, but only about 4% of the physician workforce. If you're looking at also at among non-white physicians, as also echoed by Dr. Chin, less than 30 years old, there are more women than men. And among Black medical school applicants, 2/3 are women. You can see these percentages of things that are going on just by these changes in bar graphs, okay? We don't want to, well, as needed to be incorporated into this topic would be the idea of mass incarceration of African-American men, but that's a different conversation for another day, okay? These are some of the medical schools that have the highest graduation rates for African-American individuals. Howard, Meharry, those. Meharry, which is in Nashville, I believe, was where one of my chief residents was from when I was a resident. Okay. How about other racial diversity in medical specialties? In 2012, women were well represented in OBGYN, pediatrics, dermatology, psychiatry, pathology, and family medicine. Among non-white trainees, family medicine, OBGYN, psychiatry, and pediatrics had the most racial and ethnic diversity. And women were least represented in orthopedics, Blacks in ENT, and Hispanics and Latinx in ophthalmology, and women and minorities historically are currently underrepresented in infectious disease. Minority physicians have historically provided most of the medical care for non-English speaking and continually and historically underserved patient populations and continue to do so. In 2012, there were approximately 700,000 practicing physicians, 9.2% were members of underrepresented minorities. And among Black trainees for physician jobs, top medical specialties chosen were family medicine and OBGYN, least was ENT. And among Hispanic trainees, psychiatry, family medicine, OBGYN and peds, ophthalmology was the least. Currently, women make up approximately 40% of the full-time medical school faculty. Female faculty members who are Black, Latino, Hispanic, Native American, Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders make up approximately about 4% of the full-time medical school faculty. Non-white women make up approximately 3% of department chairs. This is even evidenced in our own halls. Looking at this, Upstate Medical University, from this publication in 2020, there are 26 academic departments or chairs in the College of Medicine. There are 5 female chairs, only 1 Black female chair, 3.8%. What are things that OBGYNs can take? This article comes from a gentleman by the name of Dr. Washington Hill, who is an African-American maternal fetal medicine, African-American male maternal fetal medicine specialist in Sarasota, Florida. What are things that we can do? We can increase our health equity knowledge and advocacy where we work. We can ask questions like, how diverse is our workforce at all levels? At the student level, at the nursing level, at the administrative level, we can speak up. We can no longer remain silent and not speak up. Microaggressions are a real thing, and we all need to be aware of them. Other strategies that we can do. We need to confront our own racial issues, okay? To confront our own racism and act against personal biases. 84% agree that disparities impact their practices, but only 29% of people believe that personal biases affect how patient care is done. Other things. Black women have limitations in access to all sorts of different resources. Black women are more likely to die, as was stated, in pregnancy-related things. Black infants are more likely to die before their first birthday. Black infants are more likely to be born early. Black patients with Black physicians are 2.94 times more likely to report receiving all needed medical care compared with those other physicians. And Black patients with Black physicians are 1.7 times more likely to report receiving preventative care compared to those with other physicians as well. Even my agency, the American College of OBGYN, has addressed this as well, and they've made some statements. They've stated that racism in overt and covert forms persists in the delivery of healthcare. Black women are 3 times more likely to experience maternal mortality or severe maternal morbidity than white women. American Indian and Alaskan Native women experience adverse maternal outcomes at a greater rate than white women, and Black and Latinx populations experience higher rates of mortality from cervical cancer than white women. The American College of OBGYN also states that we need to recognize that race is a social construct, not biologically based. It is important to understand that racism, not race, impacts healthcare, health, and healthy outcomes, and systemic and institutionalized racism are pervasive in our country and our country's healthcare system and our healthcare institutions, including the fields of obstetrics and gynecology. One of the things that has been done to combat this is this proposal of the Black Maternal Health Momnibus. We're going to go into that just briefly. This is a work that has been done by Congressman Lauren Underwood, Congressman Alma Adams, and then formerly Senator Kamala Harris, now Vice President Kamala Harris. And the president and members of the Black Maternal Health Caucus are introducing this Black Maternal Health Momnibus. Basically, are a number of bills and legislations done to improve the Black maternal morbidity and mortality. So some of the suggestions that have been made, we're going to be making critical improvements in social determinants of health, provide funding for community-based programs, comprehensively studying the unique maternal health facing veterans, perinatal workforce, extending care to incarcerated women, using digital tools, those sort of things. Some updates. So this legislation was brought by freshman Congressman Lauren Underwood, who herself is a nurse, and saw the challenges and the needs for improvement. What are some updates? So this was done again by sponsored by Congressman Lauren Underwood. It was introduced in March 2020 and March 9th, 2020, and the last action was on July 13th, 2020, where it's referred to the subcommittee on health. Some updates for the Black Maternal Health Momnibus, recent updates. In November 30th, 2021, President Biden signed the Moms Who Serve Act of 2021. This is the first of 12 bills included in this act. $15 million behind maternal care for veterans, and nearly one in 20 female veterans are the ages of 18 to 45 are not white. The Build Back Better plan that passed through the House in November of 2021 would approve $295 million to diversify the country's perinatal workforce, including $50 million for doulas, and provide $170 million to address food, housing, and transportation barriers facing pregnant and postpartum females, as well as environmental risks. In addition, the Build Back Better plan will require states to extend existing Medicaid postpartum coverage from 60 days to 12 months. The American Reserve Plan, which President Biden signed into law in March of 2021, gave states an option to make that extension. And although we talk about things such as healthcare costs, remember, Medicaid covers the birth, that is, the birth costs of about 2/3 of Black people, and Medicaid also, which is, we're talking about insurance for impoverished people. Medicaid pays for approximately 50% of all births in the United States. These are some of the states that have made some changes to potentially their Medicaid expansions and some other ways that we can support maternal health. So some basic conclusions. Racism is a public health issue. The concepts of race, racism, and racial issues have been incorporated in the application of the practice of women's health in the United States since at least 1619. Historically, Black women in particular have been victimized, objectified with respect to their reproductive health. Only now, based on current data, are these issues being more closely evaluated and efforts made to value the reproductive lives and well-being of Black women. Black women have the highest rates of maternal mortality and morbidity in the United States. Currently, college-educated Black women have some of the highest rates of morbidity with respect to childbearing and education. Proposed legislations and concerted cultural changes are working to improve the healthcare of all, but particularly the healthcare of Black and African-American women, and especially if OBGYN is taking active measures to educate its members, not just to recognize the implicit racial biases in healthcare, but also to make improvements. It's a quote from Fannie Lou Hamer: "A Black woman's body was never her own." This is Representative Shirley Chisholm, an absolutely fantastic woman. These are some of my references. And again, this is a reference from the HBO series, The Watchmen. This is the development of a character named Hooded Justice, a young Black man who survived the Tulsa, Oklahoma riots and became the first Black superhero. And the only way he could do it was by pretending he was white. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for that talk, Dr. Stanley. We really appreciate it. I know a round of applause doesn't sound as good through mute, but just know that we're all clapping. I
appreciate it. Thanks.
Yes. So if anyone has any questions at this point in time, please utilize the reactions feature at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand, and our chat moderators will ask you to unmute, and at which point you can unmute and feel free to ask your question.
So I'll just let you folks do that, okay? And I'll just wait for the questions. If there are any.
You are getting some praise in the chat. Rebecca said, amazing presentation.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks. Appreciate it. Well, I just answered everything. That's fantastic. We've solved the racial issue, in a 40-minute talk. I'm glad to hear about that.
You were just so thorough.
Exactly.
Oh, it looks like we have a question, Nicole.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, good morning. Thank you so much for presenting.
My pleasure.
So, yeah, given all the all the things that have developed, it sounds like there's been quite a lot of important steps made. What do you think is going to be the next best step for addressing racial disparities, in healthcare?
That's a very good question. It's a very loaded question. I mean, if you think about it, one of the many things that has been going on in our country is that things are so divided across the board, right? Okay, you have a division of, how many discussions or heated discussions have all of us got into just on the idea of vaccinations, right? Okay. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of unfounded conspiracy theory, blah, 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 blah. So I think that's difficult to do, and that's difficult to wade through. I think what we need to do is wade through the facts of things. I think we need to have clear objectives, clear leadership changes, clear mandates that these things are going on. Like when you think about it. So one of the problems that's been going on historically with respect to the Build Back Better plan is that members of Biden's own party, Democrats, have been fighting against it. Okay, you have some moderate, Democrats who don't want to do this stuff. Okay, so why? That's the question you have to ask. Why are things like that going on? Okay, are they politically motivated or whatever? The only way that's going to help is that we have people like you who are out there who are demanding changes. That's the only thing. Okay, people my generation can speak and yell about it and talk about it to the top of our lungs, but you guys have to do stuff about it. So I know that's not probably the answer that you wanted to hear, and I don't, and it's such a complex thing. I don't think there's one particular way that we can do it, but anything that we all have to do is help. Just by being here, you're realizing the problem. That's the first step.
Yeah, it's certainly a wicked problem that is, multifaceted, and there's definitely not one solution, that, can address all this. What I find, like, I'm the diversity, equity, inclusion officer for my department upstate in neurology. And, I'm just, I didn't get any training in medical school to do that job. And I'm very impassioned about the work, and I'm learning how to do the job to the best of my ability. But, I think one of the big challenges for me is just learning, like, I know the problem is there, but like learning like where the problem like is and all of its many manifestations and how to measure it. For me, that's like and that's not just, that's amongst, my other members of my team, my coworkers, and then also for my patients, we're trying to, we're just at the very beginning stage to try to understand, like, well, what are our own disparities in our own backyard?
Right.
And, how to measure those things, like, and I think, for a lot of medical folks, especially if they didn't get training and learning how to measure this stuff, even though it's so important. So I think that's like, I don't know, like that would be like, my hope is that someday I could go to like a class where I could like learn, get some guidance in learning how to like measure those things, how to be smart about it, and how to be able to measure the stuff later.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a tough thing, but again, having programs like this and forums like this, at least we can start the process. Okay, that's, I think, is the important thing, starting the process.
Yeah, a lot happens with just starting the conversation.
Yep.
Anyway, thank you so much.
And with starting that conversation that Nicole just brought up, we had a question in the chat asking, is this content covered in the required curriculum for medical students, the historical context and framing of all of that?
Well, as I said, this lecture is, I believe, on Blackboard, the full lecture where I have other examples as well. It is in there. I don't know if it's a required thing. I mean, if you want the leadership to do that, you make it a required thing, and I do it. I'd be happy to do it. Okay, I don't mind talking about this stuff. I love doing it. So anytime that you can get something out of it and looking at things from a different context, I think is really important.
We have a lot of questions coming in now. So Dr. Narsipur.
No problem. We're still okay on time? We're okay? Like the fabric of the universe isn't going to explode because of something, right? We're going to be okay?
I think we're okay.
Okay, good. Perfect. I appreciate that.
Hi, good morning. It's Sri Narsipur, Dr. Stanley.
I know you. We've sat next to each other at dinner a bunch of times.
Yes, we have. And you did a fantastic job covering a lot of material. I wanted to follow up on Nicole's comment. She's not the only one struggling with this. We all do. In the Department of Medicine, our diversity officer is Rachel Hopkins, and we've talked about those kind of issues. So yeah, we're making progress, we're moving. But Dr. Stanley, I wanted to make a suggestion. I think this is a group of insiders, and I think we're pretty like-minded and motivated, but I think we're at a point where we should be focusing a lot on our recruitment. And by that, recruitment of medical students, of faculty, of nurses, I think we need to have a centralized recruiting office that makes this a priority, that's linked with the diversity office. And by bringing in people, we start to generate our own momentum. What do you think?
I 100% would agree with you with that, my friend. And so many things go into that. Let's look about things from sort of a different historical context. So when you and I went through our medical training, I think we're pretty close in age. One of the things that I certainly got a lot of was, and especially my colleagues, why are you here? Okay, why are you here? Why are you in medicine? Okay, there was a lot of, you're here only because of affirmative action, or you didn't deserve any of that sort of stuff. So that's the stuff that we had to deal with for college, medical school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But like you said, there's now has to be a paradigm shift of things, okay? And we need to do that. We need to start recognizing things like that. We need to have the idea that we need to recognize that, okay, just because you walk through the halls of upstate and you see, people of color in sanitation, and janitorial positions, that doesn't make us diverse, okay? Okay, that doesn't make us diverse, okay? When you have department chairs, when you have faculty, when you have nursing, you have nurse managers, nurse educators, PAs, that sort of stuff, those sort of positions where you have people who just look differently than how things have looked historically. I agree with you 100%. I think that the more we can push as faculty to have some sort of centralized process where this can be done, I think that's an excellent idea. And I would 100% be involved and love to do that with you, my friend. Other questions?
We have Ashley. She raised her hand, so she can go next.
Yes, I had a question. I just wanted to say good morning, Dr. Stanley.
Hello,
and
Ashley.
Oh, am I unmuted? Oh,
Nope.
okay.
You hear you perfectly.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, and I appreciate you taking the time out to make that presentation and share it with us. So in honor of MLK Day, I kind of wanted to ask, as future physicians, what can we do right now and maybe in the future to be anti-racist? So I know you said, of course, educating ourselves and perhaps even advocating for our patients, but is there anything specifically we can do?
That's kind of I appreciate the sentiment, and that's kind of a different, I would say there's different things. Okay, there's different things, okay? They're seeing a Confederate flag, they're seeing a swastika, right? There's hearing the N-word, and then there's microaggressions, right? Okay, those are, varying aspects on the same thing, okay? I think the most important thing we need to do is listen to each other, okay? And have open discussions about why this or why that, okay? And we have to be willing to listen to each other as well, okay? The reason I feel this way about this is XYZ PDQ. The reason I feel this way is XY PDQ, that sort of stuff, okay? Those sort of things. So we have to be really, really cognizant about that and take away some of the rhetoric and take away some of the noise and just sit down and have discussions with folks. That's probably the best way to do it, okay? And hear where everybody's coming from, okay? You may not even realize something. The other side may not even realize something, okay? We're all trying to do this to make this world a better place, most of us, okay? But, just have those ideas, okay? Again, probably not the answer that you wanted, but that's the best answer I can get off the top of my head, okay? Again, just by being in this presentation and thinking about it, you're gonna look at things differently later today.
So we had a few more questions in the chat. I'm not sure how much time we have left. Alan can cut us off.
Yes.
There was, Rebecca had a question. Could you cite any state level laws or policies that would improve the situation in New York?
Could I say, I don't think I can necessarily do that because that's not where my gift is. I'm sure that there are, people who are more labor related and that sort of stuff. I'm sure if I really pressed it, our younger daughter, who is an advocate for this stuff since she's been out of the womb, would probably know these sort of things. I just don't know off the top of my head. And I don't want to give anybody any information that may be false. I just don't think I know, but I'm sure there's an ability to find that stuff.
Great. And the last question we had was from Amanda, and she said, thank you. Any tips for conversations with peers when one feels that racism is affecting care at the bedside?
Okay, that's a very, very fair question, okay? I think if we adapt the policy, okay, treat literally everybody the same. Don't have any preconceived notions on anybody. Just because somebody may look a certain way, may dress a certain way, may, have their hair a certain way, you don't know their story, you don't know them. If you treat everybody the same, give everybody the mutual respect that they deserve, unless a person shows you otherwise afterwards, that's probably the best way to do things, okay? Walking in there in any patient encounter, just treat everybody the exact same how you would want to be treated. That's probably the best way to do it, and make no assumptions on anybody. Again, it sounds like kind of an empty sort of thought, but we learned this in kindergarten. Treat somebody as you want them to be, treat them as you would want them to treat you. Same idea.
It looks like there's a lot of sources being shared of people with more knowledge on the policies, if you guys wanted to check out those links.
Yes, wow, there's a lot of things out there. Like I said, stuff I just don't know, so.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. I think we do need to wrap this session up, unfortunately. But feel free to join the conversation on social media and continue it. As with all things, it's great to have an introduction to an idea and really to move forward from here, to build that network, to collaborate and listen to everyone. That's where we can take it to the next steps and actually act towards advocacy.
And like I said, just in terms of things, if you folks wanted this presentation to be given, and first year, second year, whatever, I would be happy to do this and make this a part of the curriculum if that is requested. Let me know. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Good luck with the rest of the presentation. Thanks, everybody. Always a pleasure, Professor.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our second breakout session of the day. Here is our esteemed panel who will be discussing the Upstate Medical School experience. I'll just give you a quick overview of who we have here, and I'll let them take it from there, introduce themselves. One is a much more close-knit panel, despite us being far apart. So please feel free to use the hand raise feature in the chat under reactions, and we will ask you to unmute, and similar to other breakout sessions, you can then feel free to ask your question, and we could hopefully get a great dialogue going. So we might have different positions, but luckily everyone's named on the screen. So we have Ms. Crystal Ripa, Director of Special Admissions Programs here at Upstate. We have Rachel, who's in charge. Hi, Rachel, who's in charge of SUNY Upstate Student Admissions. We have a current fourth student, El Masa, with us, as well as a current third year student, Mike Pollock. All right, so I'll let you guys take it from there. Crystal, would you like to start off and then pass the baton on? A more astute observer would have picked someone who wasn't working with their camera just then. That's totally on me.
That's okay. That's okay. So my children are off today, so I didn't think you guys wanted to hear Paw Patrol super loud. So that's why I was moving. So my name is Dr. Crystal Ripa, and I am here. I've been Upstate for about 10 years in a number of different capacities. And the reason I am really passionate about health justice, so not only am I a physician workforce researcher and a diversity officer for the institution, but it's important for me to address that we have to take health justice to a system level in the funnels that bring students and health professionals to the fields. And so it can't just be performative that we have pathways and pipelines. We have to try to address and change really why we are short, why there is inequity. And so, as a researcher, I've looked at our physician workforce as it relates to primary care and who are likely to go into primary care. As a professional, my life's work has always been to demystify the processes about medical school admissions, MD, PhD, whatever I can get my hands on, really. And to break down the complexities, especially for those that come from varying backgrounds. I'm a first generation student, so particularly, I kind of felt like I was making it up as I went along. And I feel like the information to gain access doesn't have to be so complex, so, mystical unicorn. And so I have a lot of reasons why I'm passionate about being here and so thankful for the invitation. But I think our funnels in to these professions is one of our biggest spots where we can do system work, but it can't be the only one, because if we do that, right, it's performative. It doesn't change the experience of our students, of our patients in our communities. If we only allow students in, we have to support them, and we have to be able to retain, graduate, and put those people into careers that are meaningful and continue to address issues of health justice and health equity. So that is my very long-winded way of my introduction. And thank you so much, everybody, for having me. Rachel, I'm passing it along to you.
Well, that's a tough one to follow. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rachel Zonetti. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an admissions advisor here at SUNY Upstate, and I particularly get to work with the Norton College of Medicine. So I actually started my position here about almost 2 years ago, actually under Dr. Ripa. So I've learned a lot of really great things from her, especially about all those wonderful things she was talking about. But I think the most important role in admissions is, understanding these different concepts that we're talking about here at the Health Justice Conference. And really, at the end of the day, medical school admissions are kind of gatekeepers, and there's a lot that needs to be done in that field to really ensure that healthcare systems moving forward are more diverse, inclusive, and really effective when we think about it. Because really, at the end of the day, when healthcare systems are inclusive and diverse, they're more effective, and you have better health outcomes for folks. So obviously my role is very peripheral to that, but I am very honored, just as Dr. Ripa said, to be here and be part of this panel. And I'll pass it to Amasa.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amasa. I use she, her pronouns. I was originally born in Bosnia, and I moved to America when I was 4. I grew up in Binghamton, so about an hour away. And I went to Binghamton for undergrad. I majored in biology and came straight to medical school after graduating. While here, I've been mostly involved in student government. I've been in the Rural Med program. I went to Portland for my rotations. I did mentorship and also involved in refugee health within the area as well. And I'm currently a 4th year somehow, and I applied to MedTeach this cycle, and I'm super interested in working with underserved populations, advocacy, and medical education. So if anyone has any questions about those, I'm happy to talk about it, and just happy to be here. And then Mike, you're the last one standing.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mike. I'm an MS3. I'm from Buffalo. He, him are the pronouns. I grew up in Buffalo. I went to Geneseo for undergrad, graduated in 2011. So I'm a bit of a non-traditional student, but to be honest with you, in a lot of ways, I'm from a privileged background, and I would only be able to be in medical school because of that privileged background with the non-traditional route I took. That route involved being an EMS and a lot of volunteering, a lot of public health stuff with free clinics. And since being in med school, I've volunteered with the Rama Clinic here, which is a free clinic that serves the South Side, and a lot of volunteering with house calls for homeless. So that's similarly, I'd like to work with an underserved population when I'm practicing, and happy to be here today.
Yeah, thank you all so much for speaking at the conference today. We sincerely appreciate it. So at this time, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So feel free to utilize the reactions feature at the bottom to raise your hand, and Sydney should message you asking you to unmute, at which point you can feel free to ask your question. While everyone's looking for that, I guess I can start with a question. So in your experiences here, what can you guys just all go through and sort of describe something that you've seen, I guess, positive towards the promotion of health justice, or something, or vice versa, something where you see that there is a dearth or a lack currently that you believe can be filled? I guess I should pick some. Anyone can take it. I believe in you guys.
Let's start with the students. Oh, I was gonna say, let's start with the students first.
I agree.
I'll share a thought. Here at Upstate, there's learning communities that are meant to foster like-minded interests in students, and just facilitate connections between students and faculty. And there was a big revamp, I think just about a year ago. And the one I'm in is called Elizabeth Blackwell. She was the first female physician in the United States. And so I think these communities are doing a better job of focusing on things like health justice, and they're also giving a nod to the really impressive history of this institution that I think sometimes gets a little forgotten about for being a leader for a long time on those topics.
Going off of that, I think Upstate does a really good job in offering kind of some elective academic opportunities where you can learn about those sort of things that Mike is talking about, just this conference being an example. One place that I would like for it to be different is that I wish some of those were more well incorporated within the curriculum and were required teaching. For example, history of medical racism, or if we are going to talk about SUNY Upstate, the history of Upstate, how it was created, what people and populations were displaced in order for the buildings to be made, in order for this institution to be here today. So I think that's one area where we could grow and kind of continue.
I would say, honestly, I think the higher up administrative folks, and our leaders, so Dr. Mantosh Dewan, I think health justice is something that they are really passionate about and do really care about. There's been plenty of times where Dr. Dewan has come down to our office and said, how can we better support these students, or what can we do to get these students in the door? So that is something that I've always been really impressed about. And I think in general, the faculty and staff here are very caring towards our students, which I think is really important in general.
I think that what is important is that there are so many willing to have the conversation and see ourselves as a work in progress. I've never at Upstate had a conversation where any of my colleagues or peers have said, yep, we're in a great place. We have done all that we need to and can do. And I think that that's important for an institution to recognize that there is always more, there's always different, and to keep on striving for things to be different. I think that one of the areas that we've been incredibly passionate about, and Mike kind of alluded to it, is those learning communities have a lot of different mentorship models. I think what becomes difficult in those mentorship models is making sure that we have adequate and appropriate mentors from diverse backgrounds. And I think that we have struggled as an institution, and we are one of all of them that struggle to recruit diverse faculty. And some of that is the restrictions of, state pay and bringing folks to Syracuse, New York. But some of that is because they lack diverse peers. And so I think that, we are actively working to continue to recruit. And, I know that our faculty development office, it's on their mind in such a big conversation. And it's a struggle. And we absolutely don't want to burn out the diverse faculty and staff that we have. And so I think that it's almost a churning wheel all the time, is that we lean so heavily on, our diverse representation, but yet we are having trouble recruiting additional diverse representation. And so I think that that's something that we continue to need to work on, and it's no mystery though. So, I do think the biggest part is that we open up that mentorship and have the conversations about what's needed further.
I have a question, which is I guess it's kind of a question, twofold question a little bit, which is one, I think that I've worked or in my undergrad, where you have admissions programs and stuff like that. And I think that's really great. And I think you talked a little bit about how seeing yourself at this campus is one of the reasons that people agree to ultimately want to come to some place. But the other thing that I think is I'd love to hear about, especially from you guys, which the fourth years and at admissions, just talking to people who are potentially applying or looking to, come here and say, not only do we have that as our conscience on our mind about that diversity, but also here's what we're doing to help you get that kind of education as a person who already knows about, who's had to live through health inequities and all these things. Because I sometimes think that it's the level of education about that is all for people who aren't actually aware of it, instead of there's a tons of people who are aware of it and have lived it, and then they're like, okay, now I'm in medicine, and I'm ready to not just hear the basics again and again about my community. I already know that. And just like how admissions is talking to people a little bit about not having to be the legwork to say, all right, we want a health justice conference, but we're the diversity here already. So we want to push it further than that for ourselves.
So I think that your question is an important but a difficult one. And if I understand it correctly, it speaks to kind of the asset model and the burnout model of our diverse communities, and kind of either having to represent some of those really hard conversations or having to hear them over and over again, because other people and other peers maybe don't prioritize them in the same ways that have been lived experiences for some. And I think that is that how I'm understanding your question? Is that correct, Valentina?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm talking about this in a general sense. I'm thinking about it. I'm a Native student. I am a part of the Native, student organization on campus, and I feel like there's not a lot. I don't know of a lot of people. I know Dr. Thompson gives lots of talks, but he gives talks. One of the things that I was interested about upstate is that there is kind of this, at least in writing, about having Native students come here, but then you kind of get here and you're like, oh, well, people talk about Native students, but it's not for Native students. It's for people who don't know about Native students and are trying to learn about that, which is great and necessary. That's what I was thinking of, but I think that's probably true. I can't speak for them, for other people from different backgrounds as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so my partner in crime as a diversity officer is Nakia Chambers, who holds infinity circles. And that is particularly for students from particular backgrounds or identify in particular ways, to be able to kind of talk about shared experiences and to be able to really have those safer spaces and safer dialogues among, those who share identities. And I think it's something we can do better. I think that with Dr. Thompson, who I work with on the pre-admission workshop for Native students, I think that your message is well received, that we talk about prioritizing Native students. And I have to be honest, because those efforts were started 4 years ago now, we are still trying to realize good outcomes of those. And good outcomes is about students getting in anywhere and helping to change the national trajectory for health equity and health justice. But here at Upstate, we still face a lot of challenges with trying to prioritize those students actually being here in a variety of professions. And so, I think it's important that, it's not only that we're teaching, but that we are, really elevating the voices of our students. But again, it sometimes when we elevate the voices of our students, sometimes that also equates to putting our students in like an asset model to always represent those conversations. And so I don't think I'm addressing your point well, but I do think it's an important point that I'm just trying to inform. Anybody else have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, Valentina, I absolutely agree with you. And that is something that I would like to see us, as Dr. Ripa mentioned, improve upon, because I think it's really hard sometimes in an admissions position. We want to bring these students to the helm, but then once they're here, what are we doing to help support them and then make sure that all folks kind of get on the same level when it comes to this type of knowledge, and considering all the places where students are coming from in those conversations. So it definitely is a tricky question, but an important question to ask. And I think that's something that we need to kind of help unpack a little bit and kind of operationalize, if that's, maybe that might not be the best term for it, but figuring out goals that we can achieve along the way, and again, educating those who don't have this knowledge, but then also thinking about the folks who, okay, I've lived this, now what can I do? So I don't know if there's like an exact answer that I can give you right now, but I definitely think that that's something that we should be working towards.
I really appreciate your honesty about answering that question. I know it's kind of a little bit open-ended, but I also, Kelly, Crystal, sorry, I don't know why I said Kelly, wanted to thank you, because I know that you guys are working really hard. At least there is a Native student, admissions workshops and stuff like that, which is really awesome. And I've been a part of that. Just thinking about it in terms of other communities too, of like, okay, how do we not just get them to apply, but then get them to say Syracuse is someplace where I can see myself being and want to go. So not just getting in, but attending.
Well, and in our diversity, so on our diversity team, we have 2 Native ambassadors. So Dr. Brian Thompson and Trina Skeel, and both of them are looking in ways to embed ourselves better in communities, because it almost feels ingenuine when we have this national presence for our pre-admission workshop, and then locally, sometimes we ask ourselves, what are we doing for people in our backyard? And so we have extended really kind of like a counselor in residence to the Haudenosaunee Promise program at Syracuse University, which again has a kind of national footprint, but has a local presence mostly. And both Trina and Dr. Thompson are working hard to be able to establish more longevity and presence in our local Oneida Onondaga nations. So, it is a work in progress that we need to do a better job. I know that we are helping to run a clinic on Onondaga Nation, but it sounds like we need to, and not just from this conversation, but I know that we need to do a better job of staffing it, of providing resources. But Dr. Dewan does an amazing job. He did a vaccine clinic down there, and he does a lot of amazing work with the help of, Dr. Corona and other folks in our leadership. So I think it's a work in progress. And I think that, again, we always have to realize that better can be done. That pre-admission workshop, I'm obsessed with it. I love it. I'm 100% biased, but it is a little bit, again, performative if we can't actually get behind the cultural and local connections. Absolutely an important conversation, and one that's continuing to progress all the time. So thank you for asking about it.
Good morning. Thank you for all for being here. I'd say I'm Nicole Brescia. I'm the she, her pronouns, and let's see, I work in the Department of Neurology. Let's see, I had a question kind of, I guess like dovetailing from Valentina's, I think a lot of times, when you get into medical school, sometimes you think, oh, like I'm going to medical school, I'm going to be a doctor. Like this is, I'm there, I'm there, it's happened. And then like you arrive and you're like, oh, wow. Like that's not true. And it seems like no matter what level you're at, whether you're in medical school, you just got into medical school, you're graduating, going to residency, or even now, like I'm still fairly new attending. This is my first job out of residency, and I've been here for 2 years. And even now, like when you're a new attending, like you always need guidance, and you always need mentorship to be successful and to help you find your feet. So, and that seems to be something that a lot of other organizations, I just went to a Child Neurology Society meeting, and they were talking about that quite a bit too, in terms of like research and K awards, that there's a special K award program for like young, like junior investigators to get mentorship and to help them be successful in getting their K award. So, so it's exciting to see those things. And I was curious, in your guys' experience here at Upstate, what kinds of mentorship opportunities are available, for students. And when it comes to getting everybody ready for residency, what kinds of language and tools have you guys like learned about to sort of help you ask for the things that you need and want when you go to residency?
I can start with this one. I think our biggest area for mentorship usually comes within the learning communities, which we actually set up a little bit of a different system this year, where a fourth year is paired with the third year, paired with the second year, paired with the first year. That way you have more of a longitudinal relationship throughout the whole time. And then in terms of residency, I think one big strength that we have is how incorporated that I typically feel that the fourth years are when it comes to that transition. We have in March a meeting for the third years where we kind of talk about how we went through the process, what we learned, what we would do differently. And it's also specialty based as well. So you can go into breakout rooms with whatever specialty you're considering doing and get advice kind of personalized in that direction as well. And then we do have a couple other workshops. For example, Dean White has led a couple as well to kind of help us through the process of ERAS. But I definitely hear your point, and I think I wish there was a little bit more mentorship right at the beginning of med school and more mentorship right at the end of med school, because I think those are two big, very big transition points where you can use a little bit more guidance, a little bit more maybe like, I understand how you're feeling and everything's going to be okay. You just kind of have to keep chugging along.
I'll share a couple of thoughts on mentorship, I guess. For me, it's been a challenge, right? With the pandemic and the learning communities getting revamped, they were kind of on pause for a little while. I've found mentorship through the service activities that I've been a part of here. And those are really good, I think, for very specific to this conference, like figuring out what a career looks like in health justice down the road. The kind of mentorship I would feel like I could use right now is like, I'm an undecided med student halfway through third year. And it seems like there's good mentorship, I think, once you pick a specialty. But if you're undecided, I'm feeling a little not sure who to turn to. At the same time, there's been a big push this year for, I think, every class, but at least the third years, for monthly class meetings in which they are, it's not exactly mentorship because they're talking to all 160 of us at the same time, but they're telling us what we need to do to prepare for, for applying to residency. So I see a lot of efforts in place, and I think things are moving in a good direction. And I also think there's need for improvement still.
Right on. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing the thoughts. And if Rachel and Dr. Ripa have thoughts, and if I want to hear them as well, I know that I'm very, impassioned about about, working with folks. And sometimes, mentorship happens almost like by accident. Like, I had some case reports I wanted to write, and I sent out emails, and I got, got 3 awesome, med students, and, we did our case reports together, and that was, we went to that, we did the case reports. One just got sent off for publication, so fingers crossed it'll work. And I'm still in touch with those folks, even though 2 of them have, graduated, and they're now in their intern year. And, it's nice to have that relationship, but, and, or sometimes I bump into people in the elevator, and I'm like, introduce myself, they'll come and shadow me, and people come and they hang out, and it's really awesome. But I know, like, I feel like I'm kind of siloed in my little, my little bubble of pediatric neurology. And, I really would like to meet more students and be like, show them like, oh, you have an advocate, you have people who you have someone, in that department who wants to meet you and wants to be useful to you. So I guess, I don't know, any like opportunities you guys, in the panel, know of, or if there's an email chain I can hop on, ways I can just kind of bump into more of you guys, and try and make a useful relationship. And because I think sometimes they assign mentors, like I've done that in med school, and that didn't work out like so well because it wasn't like so organic. But having opportunities just to bump into people is and find that like connection, that I think that works well. But you got to like have those opportunities, I guess. So that's that was my other question about that.
And sometimes we're such a big place that it's hard to know who's kind of the contact people. So I know that our student affairs office would absolutely eat you up as like a formal mentor and advisor, but that's a little bit different than what you're asking. And I would invite you, if you want to be a clinical advisor, it's hard because we talk about this so medical school focused, and there are so many important paths and educational journeys that our students can go on and that are important. And the mentorship, although formal for the medical students, even though it's evolved very recently, and we're still understanding the benefits of the new system. Sometimes, formal mentorship, like you said, has its pros and cons. Sometimes you're assigned a mentor and there may not be like that natural chemistry. So I also think that our alumni office does like career advisory, where they bring in alumni and try to like talk about, different specialty paths, different, places that our alumni have done residency with our current students. And, I hope I know less about other colleges and their, mentorship. I know in our College of Graduate Studies, which is my former, professional home here, I know that we had some mentorship, especially from alumni and from senior students and from faculty. So I think it's really important that mentorship is critically important. I think that more of like the meet and greets and the panels and some of those opportunities to establish connections that lead to mentorship instead of assigned mentorship are important. And I probably honestly don't realize all that we do, and not that we can't do more, but we are such a big place that sometimes we do get lost in kind of all the things. But I also want to alert you. So I don't know if you've connected with the Graduate Medical Education Office, but I know that they tried to elevate, mentorship between, interns and residents and attendings or fellows, etc. And I know that, our faculty development office over on the student side of things, over on the academic side of things, also try to do very similar types of layers of mentorship. So I think it's critically important. We can always do more. But I think that there are some formal opportunities to get involved. COVID is not an excuse, but I think that us realizing those kind of in-person and networking opportunities hopefully will come back sometime soon.
Hi, can you all hear me? I'm Ann Botash. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs and Faculty Development, although I think of myself as a child abuse pediatrician, which I've been for 30-something years. I've been here since medical school. In fact, I was a medical student here starting in 1981. And I think I came here, when I walked in the door, I saw the big painting of Elizabeth Blackwell, and I thought, yes, this place supports women. I can tell you that I've had my ups and downs over the years, and it's, you know, it's not always what it seems, but at the same time, a lot has happened, a lot has changed. And I wanted to kind of add my 2 cents about mentorship. We're attempting to build a new mentorship program for faculty. And having read a lot about this, it seems that a lot of the research kind of points towards mentoring networks versus the one-on-one advising, which I think is kind of what you're craving, the one-on-one advising as students, especially when you first start out. And I think at different points in your career, you need different people to help you with, you know, whatever it is that you're working on or that your struggle is. And oftentimes in the beginning, it is that you don't really know exactly what you want to do or where you want to be. And it's hard because you don't know anyone here, right? And you don't know how to access those people. I can say with almost 100% certainty that if you reach out to any faculty member, I don't even know of anyone who's ever said no, honestly. I mean, maybe they just don't tell me that, but I think you could reach out pretty much to any faculty and you would get the support that you need. And I think Nicole is a really great example of that. Dr. Brescia is always enthusiastic. And people, I think, in the clinical world are incredibly busy, especially right now. And you might feel intimidated to go to someone, but they were there. They were where you were. It might have been a long time ago, but they were there, and they're definitely interested in working with you. But I would say when you think about mentorship, think about the different aspects, right? Like sometimes you need a coach. You need somebody behind you to say, you know, yes, you know, I agree with what you're doing, and, you know, think about it this way, and kind of help you figure out how you need to do things. Sometimes you really need somebody to role model and say, this is the way I did it, or, and sometimes you need somebody to sponsor you, right? Like you want to do a research project and you don't know who to contact, and you need somebody to make that connection for you. And that's a sponsoring kind of relationship. So you need all those people throughout your entire career. And as a student, I think it's a good opportunity for you to learn how to access those people. It doesn't come easily ever, honestly. You spend your whole career looking for important people that can help you with the rest of your career. So, you know, I would say what you need is to learn how to access mentors and how to be a good mentee. And honestly, I'd be happy to give a talk on that, Crystal, if you ever need anybody for that, because I think that you have to take responsibility as the mentee. And I know that personally from myself, that you can't underestimate your value too for the mentor. You're going to be the person who helps them see things differently too. You're bringing fresh eyes. I've had many student mentors and many student mentees and students who then gone on to become faculty who are still my mentees. So, you know, you just, you can establish long-term relationships, but even those relationships change over time. So I think mentorship is one of the most fun parts of actually being in medicine for me. And it's not that different from as a pediatrician. I see there was at least one other, yes, Dr. Dosa, one other pediatrician on here, and Dr. Brescia as a pediatric neurologist. We mentor our patients, right? And the families we have, that the parents that need help. And so we spend a lot of time just working on ways to communicate better. So I think, you know, we don't necessarily have the systems for it. And I think it's a challenge to develop those systems. As somebody mentioned, it, you know, you might, if you set something up that's not organically set up, you know, you're assigned someone. I've done that too, and it just doesn't work out. Sometimes you don't get along, or you don't have the same interests, or you don't have the same personality click that you need to have a mentoring relationship happen. That's okay too. Then you just move on. But sometimes those structures can, you know, be a challenge too, because you have a lot of those relationships that maybe aren't, you know, meant to be. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. I also just want to add, listening to the conversation today, there are a lot of things that happen at Upstate that are not really well marketed. you know, like, for example, we were talking about the Onondaga Nation and the needs that are there. And we know the needs that are at the clinic that are there. I don't think a lot of people know that Naila Khoury is doing a behavioral health program at the Onondaga Nation that was initially funded and then lost the funding, and the psychiatry department just kind of assumed the work of that program. And there, I think, you know, there's just things like that that just happen that are because of good people that care, and you don't necessarily hear about them. And I also think that kind of, I don't know, that's the magic of upstate too, that's kept me here all these years. You see these things that are wonderful people that really care about making things work. So I know we've heard a lot today about the history of trauma to Black people and other populations. And I like to think of ourselves as constantly moving forward. We do really need to continue to move forward. And we have moved forward. I've been at Upstate long enough to say we have moved forward. The numbers aren't necessarily telling us what we need to know. You know, is there a sense of belonging? That's what I would like to measure. How do people feel? Do they belong here? Do they feel like they belong here? How do we get more diverse populations to feel like they belong here? And I'll get off my soapbox now. Thanks for listening.
Hi, everyone. So I'm wondering if you all have, you know, kind of off the top of your head, any systemic changes that you would really like to see be implemented in kind of anywhere along the pipeline of like getting into medical school, or, you know, people moving on to specific residencies or anything like that.
I'll jump in. So granted, I only have a little under 2 years under my belt here at Upstate. So this is definitely coming from maybe a place that doesn't have all the historical context of the institution. But when I think about admissions and, you know, how we are able to review applications and different, you know, applicants in general, we like to talk about, you know, this holistic approach to reviewing applications. And I think the admissions committees does it the best job they possibly can in doing that when we're looking at applicants, but also considering like how folks make it to, you know, the interview process and things like that, and, you know, what things we consider and what assumptions we make. I would love to see just kind of maybe a change in maybe how we approach those types of things, and just the process. But I do think the admissions committee at least does the best it definitely possibly can in reviewing applications. I hear wonderful conversations from physicians, faculty, staff across the board when we look at different applications. But I think, yeah, it's just a really tough process. It's a lot of impossible decisions sometimes. But when we're looking at diverse individuals and their backgrounds and, you know, what ways we're screening applicants and things like that, I think that can always be improved and holistically reevaluated.
I think that my systemic change is more from a proactive recruitment standpoint. So I had talked about in the beginning how I am a physician workforce and diversity researcher, and thinking about our most vulnerable communities as it relates to, you know, higher rates of death, dying from chronic and treatable conditions. You know, I recently have gotten together with Dr. Rosamelia and Dr. Morley, and we presented on a visiting lecture series that we will offer to pre-health advisors and pre-med students about prioritizing primary care. But the systemic change that needs to happen is that the financial implications of choosing primary care have to evolve in the system. And, that needs to change both from, we can be proactive about advising pre-med students how it's important in scholarships and repayment and everything that's available. But at the end of the day, they are still looking at some semblance of investment of time, energy, and debt when the average salary for primary care physicians is $100,000 less on average across the nation than their specialty, peers. And the shortage of primary care physicians is both looming at 50,000 by 2035, but is also looming in the ways that those that are currently most underserved will continue to be the most affected. And I think that systemic change is bigger than upstate, but all we can control is what's right in front of us. And so I would really like to shift us to a primary care focused. And this was always my intention. I wanted our 3-year curriculum to be primary care focused, and I will show that bias the whole way through. But I really think that we need to make that more attractive because I feel like there is so much that we can accomplish by systemically tackling that issue. And again, that's not an upstate issue, that's a systemic issue. And I just, it's humongous and it's egregious. And when you look at particularly, I particularly looked at Native communities where the incidence of death was, 100 times, it's egregious, and it's really emotional for me to think about people are dying because we're not paying attention. So that's my spiel.
And I just want to offer, I guess the alternate point to that is that the same people who are underrepresented in primary care are typically underrepresented within the specialties as well. So the specialties also need increased representation. And I think that part's a little bit twofold, where if you don't necessarily know someone, have a mentor in that specialty, that may not be one that you are going to pursue. You may see systemic barriers to getting in that specialty. You don't know who to ask for advice. You don't know how to go about maybe getting the step score, getting the research, or getting the advisor to kind of go into that path. So one thing that I would like to see be done a little bit differently is, I guess, just again, going back to mentorship, increasing that straight from day one, where, some people show up to med school and they really only know about family medicine, internal medicine, pediatrics, and that's great. There's a whole range of surgical specialties that they may not have been exposed to at that point, or may not have never even considered themselves having a career in. So just opening kind of those doors and those conversations from day one to actually see if that is something that you're interested in. And if that is something you're interested in, to getting you the mentor to kind of pursue that as well.
Thank you, guys. Do you mind jumping in here, Dr. Greenblatt? I just have a point before we let you get to your question. Sorry. So I think Anne brought up a very interesting point that's often discussed in the business world, but often neglected in healthcare so far, and that's the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. I know that we have students and faculty in the chat range from a variety of academic and professional accomplishments and levels. So from high schoolers to undergrads to established professionals. So I just wanted to clarify something. Mentorship is sort of that idea of exactly what we've been talking about and doing all along, which is getting paired up with an established professional in the field, or learning from an older student, such as an MS3 or an MS4, who can then guide you on what to do. But sponsorship is really the evolution of that, and it's the next step. It's someone who would advocate for you behind closed doors, someone who would advocate for you in towards the advancement of not just your professional, academic, but personal growth as well. And that's something that is almost the next step that we hope to take. So I guess this question is directed first at the students, but of course, Rachel, you can feel free to jump in as well. How have you found your experience at Upstate, not just searching for mentors, but have you been able to make that transition to finding someone who you believe this individual or this doctor would sponsor me, this healthcare worker or this professor would advocate for my education that's in my greatest benefit? I know, Crystal, you mentioned earlier, there's economic incentive trying to lead us against primary care almost towards specialties and specializations. So I guess this question goes multiple ways. Has that financial impact been, I guess, expressed to you guys by your mentors or sponsors, or have they been more focused on just the academic side or just the career side of things? Feel free to answer whichever one of those that you feel most comfortable with, of course.
Yeah, I can go first. I can say I've been very lucky in meeting the people that I know at Upstate and finding some really good mentors and people that would advocate for me. So Dr. Rose Melia is just one example where I feel like she is just a very strong advocate for all of her students and kind of goes above and beyond to make sure that anything that I might need, she is kind of right there at the forefront, making sure that I have it, and that she will also connect me with people if she doesn't necessarily have the answers herself. And then in terms of the financial side, I've definitely heard, so I'm pursuing med peds, probably primary care, though I haven't really decided yet at this point. And I definitely have heard comments from people, you know, about the financial incentives or, you know, about making less money in primary care compared to like another specialty. And I guess it is frustrating hearing that, because I feel like primary care is just, it is the integral part of medicine. It's kind of just like the backbone, the foundation of everything. And I wish that it was emphasized in different ways and kind of shown as like, this is such a cool career where you can just kind of like meet people and make all these connections, and, you know, you're the first person that they get to see. And I wish that that was more emphasized. And it's interesting that I feel like some people came into med school knowing what they want to do, and it was like kind of surgical specialties, and then other people who maybe, I guess some of us just had like a different inkling where we wanted to go into primary care. So I wish again that we had those conversations earlier, and that, you know, I had kind of cut out surgery from the beginning as something that wasn't for me. But I also wish that it was something that I looked to more in the beginning and didn't necessarily come in so narrow-minded.
I don't know if I have a whole lot on this one. The mentorship, like I mentioned before, through the activities I've been involved in here, like Dr. Lehman with House Calls for Homeless, or Dr. Owida at Rama Clinic, I do feel like they have a lot of opportunity for mentorship. Sponsorship, less so, but I think that's more a factor of like, you know, I haven't pursued research myself, or like haven't had that kind of project in mind. And sort of the way Dr. Botash mentioned earlier, that's probably more my approach than something from the school. But yeah, high marks for mentorship from the people working in health justice.
I guess I do just want to add, I really like that differentiation that you offered between, you know, mentorship and sponsorship. And I think we try to do, I think in admissions, I don't get to do as much mentorship, but I do feel like we get to do a lot of sponsorship, which is probably the best part about this type of position. And that's why we have, you know, various different folks on it and admissions committees that can bring that sponsorship from different, you know, areas and knowledge bases. Especially, you know, we love having the students on the admissions committee. They always have some of the best points, honestly, sometimes in the conversations. So I do really appreciate that differentiation in this conversation as well.
So I just had a quick thought to toss in that's a little bit more out there. In addition to the students whom we lose around the admissions process, there is also a group of students who are, you know, very capable and very intelligent, who self-select out and never appear at admissions. And I think one of the real discouraging factors is residency, and knowing, you know, how intense and how impossible residency is. And these students know that as a person who either has a chronic illness or who has extensive family responsibilities, or for any other reason, you know, just does not have space in their life to do residency. And so they go do a different career. There's been a new initiative recently at Upstate, Dr. Botash could tell you more about, to value the contributions of part-time faculty and make space for part-time faculty to be recognized and be promoted. And although it's difficult to imagine how a part-time residency would work, that's just an imagination failure. And that is another place where another big group of well-qualified applicants could be found if it were possible.
I really appreciate that comment, Dr. Greenblatt. I spend a lot of time in spaces where we talk about all sorts of things like that and do lots of imagining ways that it could totally work. So then we have a question from the chat from Dr. Dosa, which is aimed mostly at the students, but I'm sure can be broad as well. That is asking, what has been the best diversity/inclusion experience for you at Upstate?
I'm tempted to say this conference. I volunteered with this the first 2 years. I absolutely love this conference. I think it's the coolest thing going at the school. But for me, it's the opportunities for volunteering to get interaction with diverse patient populations. Going with the foot clinic to the rescue mission, going out and seeing the homeless people around Syracuse in the streets. There's nothing can get close to that for me.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Mike. I was fortunate enough to work with a lot of the refugee population within Syracuse. And I think, when we think global health, we often think, somewhere super far away and across an ocean, but you can just go looking in your own backyard and you can find similar opportunities. And I'd also just like to plug, I think SNMA does an amazing job on campus, and they have some amazing programming set up continuously throughout the year, and they're just fantastic. So check out any of those events at any time. I think you'll have a great experience.
Do we have any more questions that anyone would like to ask?
Okay, well, in that case, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, as well as to everyone in our chat and participating, for asking questions and keeping the conversation going. Please feel free to join our next session. It's based around I-81, specifically the I-81 reconstruction in a comparative framework, where we will be looking and observing how that context has been transplanted and moved across the United States, and what the implications are for taking us back to our next destinations, whether that be in residency or postgraduate work, or just if we happen to move there next. All right. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you so much.